Welcome to At Talking Remote. Tony here again. Fantastic to have you here. If you are watching the show, don't forget remoteaf.co. Click on that wonderful button that says community and join us there. Join our team newsletter, Team Craft. You'll find that in the show notes below. Without further ado, we're talking about governing dynamically adaptive organisations. This week we're talking about leadership. Dave Martin, you all know he's been with us before, but we've got a new guest, Farnaz Vahab. How are you?
Oh, very well. Thank you, Tony.
Take 2 seconds to introduce yourself to everybody, Farnaz.
I'm Farnaz Vahab, at the moment working in a very exciting organization, working on organization operating model design. I was introduced to agility world when I started TDD in XP many years ago. So hopefully you cannot guess my age. But yeah, I have done many different things and very passionate about remote work and governance. So very excited to be here and talk to you guys.
21.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for. Yeah.
TDD and XP, it's still totally a thing. So yeah, could have been yesterday. Probably was.
All right, so we are talking about governing dynamically adaptive organisations, and that means that we're usually pulling off one of the pillars to talk about, and leadership is the one that we're talking about today. So, firstly, before we get stuck into a couple of other things, I just want to start with, why is leadership so important when we're talking about this governing of dynamically adaptive organisations? Farnaz, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I always have I don't know if someone else has said such a thing, but I want to relate to my day-to-day work. So when we think about the org design, we always say that the organization design is the reflection of how the systems design in that group. So that's a kind of clue to you. For me, leadership is the clue how people have been set up and culture is set up an organization. So if you want to know how people work together, what is the vibe over there, what are their values, and what you can get from people in an organization, look at their leadership. They are the reflection of their people leaders, how they treat each other and how they treat people. So I believe that if you want to influence an organization and make big changes, start from the leadership group, because their impact will be huge.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The impact of the leadership group is huge. You know, they lead the change, and we have to ensure that the way leaders lead throughout the system of work, not just in the governing mechanisms, because people look at that as PMO and projects, but we're talking about how you govern the whole system, that they have a big part to play. Dave, you've got some good thoughts on that, I know.
Oh, everyone's heard me rant at length about this. And you say, look, leaders lead the change. Leaders should lead the change. Often we find that leaders do not lead the change. Change is something that happens to their teams, but not to them. So they're managing the change potentially, but they're not necessarily leading the change. I was actually running some classes on change leadership last week, and this sort of thing was coming up, is how do leaders actually engage with the change, and the most important thing they can really do to ensure that a change takes is that active sponsorship and the role modeling of the change. On the news a few years ago, a big bank was going agile, and the CEO got up and said, "Yep, the whole bank's going agile. Agile teams start 3 levels below me," and that was the point that I knew it was going to fail, because the leaders are not engaging with the change. It's like, yeah, do change to everybody else, but just not to me. And that's an excuse for everybody else in the organisation to go, well, I'm too important to change, so therefore we're not going to do anything.
Yeah, you can see me smiling, and I wasn't smiling about what Dave was smiling because I was doing those workshops with Dave. We've been spending a lot of time in little Zoom rooms.
I know, it's shocking.
Farnaz, what's your thoughts on what Dave was saying?
Yeah, I can relate to that. Leaders need to role model. So when a change comes, it's not for my people, it's for me first. So I need to show as a leader how I am going to change and what I am going to show as a leader to my people. I know it's a big responsibility, and sometimes I feel for our leaders as well. There is a high expectation from them, especially when a change happens, in regards to the why we need to change, what's the vision, the language, how to communicate. They have big responsibilities. And usually the support is not there for leaders even to start navigating differently. Well, I was very curious about what you said, Dave, like having a workshop for leaders to show them how to change, because that's not something that happens very often. Usually someone says, oh, in order to have a better KPI and deliver faster, these are the prescriptions, this is how you need to do. And some leaders, they take it as a prescription and they follow the steps without even knowing that that leadership needs to start from them first.
Yeah.
And that's not in that way. There are so many other internal and intrinsic motivators needs to be there to support them through that journey.
Yeah, look, honestly, one of the most fundamental problems that we've got in just about every organisation today is that leaders are never taught to lead. Some people are great at it and they pick it up and they're amazing. And some organisations do train leaders, which is great. But most organisations, they take their really good operational people and they start to promote them up because they're really great people into leadership roles. But they've never been given the training or the knowledge on what leadership actually is and what leadership means. So they continue to manage rather than to lead. So you get quite senior leaders who are essentially stuck down in the execution of work still, and that's where the whole organisation just gets snarled up in this. You know, you've heard me talk about it before. This stuck in execution, where all they can focus on is the execution of work, and they're not thinking about the other domains of leadership around strategy and steering and improvement type of activities.
Yeah, it's an interesting. So I'm gonna take a bit of a other side of the fence stance just to get the conversation going. But as leaders, and I've been a leader, you've been a leader, etc., right? I don't have time for that. The construct of the organisation is not allowing me, or I don't understand why I need to change that. This is the way we've always done it as a leader. That's the leadership culture. How do you change that kind of thing? Because that's really, really part and parcel. I know leaders get there are plenty of examples that you talked about, Dave and Farnaz, but I think there's also that other piece where even if they've been taught to lead or haven't been taught to lead, there's this inherent piece when you're promoted up through an organisation, you inherit the leadership DNA of the organisational construct of what's expected, and you also end up with the complexity. You play that. We talked about the complexity tax. When you pay that complexity tax in terms of the ability to lead and get stuck in execution. Your thoughts, Farnaz?
One of the first things that I use is that you need to prioritize. You are a human being with 24 hours. We usually have a family and some work outside of the work. So you need to prioritize and work on the most important thing for you and your organization. And what is the most impactful one? So the good thing about leaders, they usually have a very good support group around. They have people at different levels that they can help and be part of that journey. But again, comes from the internal, how much they can trust, how much to their people, what autonomy are they providing, at what level they are passing the decision making to other peoples, and for what parts they are leading that. They need to make tough calls and kind of bring that kind of prioritization to see what is the most important thing for me and my company and my people. Yes, it's hard to find the right space, right time for those things, but I think they need to learn to leverage the resources that they have around themselves and use the system of work in the right way to get a better outcome.
Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. Using the system of work and trusting the system of work to give you information rather than having to dive into control. And you're right, the leadership DNA of the organisation, as I say, a bad system will beat a good person every time. So you take the world's best leader and you put them into a really toxic, highly political work environment, and they're going to be a terrible leader in that space because that's the sort of leader that system breeds. So I think the solution is to really be intentional about it and change the system within the organisation to enable leaders to lead properly. And that's, as a leadership coach, I'm sort of obligated to say, get a leadership coach. It'll really help. But really, just looking at the system of leadership. If an organisation wants to do something, like improve its leadership or improve its system of work, or any of these things, including how we lead in that as a really intentional piece, and really working on the system of leadership, and you're using a mechanism like leading by with intent, or there's lots of frameworks out there you can use to start to look at the way leadership works within the organization and just go, what's working, what's not working, how do we as leaders need to change the system to enable us to do our jobs better.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that focus, I think both of you mentioned the focus. How do you put some focus on that? Which is a good segue, because we've been using a particular tool. So this particular group, I'll just note that James, who's meant to be with us, he's off stage at the moment. His camera's not working. As soon as he gets his camera working, he'll join us. But yeah, when we're talking about that stuff, it's really about the focus. And as a group, we've been working with Esther, who's been on the show before, for over the last period of time, on some tools. And I thought it might be pointed out. It's a really good segue into, well, if you're thinking about focus, look at that. I've trained you up. You're doing segues. Well done. You can come back again. James is going to leave and come back because his camera's not working, so we'll talk to him shortly.
I could be terrible and ask whether it's his camera that's not working or his alarm clock.
Oh, there we go. All right. But while we're at it, I thought I'd bring this tool up so we could have a bit of a chat about that, because this helps with that focus, right? So you want to talk a little bit to it, just a tad, Dave?
Yeah, so this is a tool for doing pretty much what I was sort of mentioning before. Is there's 3 domains within the organisation, and there's the making domain, where it's the details of the work. That's where a lot of organisations get stuck, where you've got all your senior leaders sitting in project steerco meetings the whole time, looking at the execution of work. Then you've got your enhancing and enabling piece, which is basically what it says on the tin. It's how do you enhance and enable the organization's capability to deliver. So process improvement, building new skills, that sort of thing. And then there's the steering domain, which is steering the ship. What's the correct direction for us to be taking? And we've actually run some surveys on C-level execs on this. And what we find is that when we ask them where they should be spending their time, most of them will say, we should be spending most of our time in steering. Then we get them to look at their calendars, and where they actually spend most of their time is in making. And when we did this in quite large rooms of people, 90% of the room was just going, oh, this is terrible. Having this view of where you are spending your time versus where you should be spending your time is one of the first tools you can use for a leadership team to refocus where you are looking. Should we be spending so much time in making? Can we let this go? Can we step our conversations up, sort of more into enhancing, enabling, and steering?
Yeah, one of the great things about it is it is a focus mapping tool. So when I say to leadership teams, and you and I have run something very similar to this, you can use this individual, or you can use this at the macro, right, with the leadership or a large team of leadership. But the reality of it is, once they start looking at it, and the thing I always say is the lean sort of thing is, a problem well written is a problem half solved. And so it goes back to that point, is when we put these things here and we look at it, ideal versus actual versus the different layers of where they're sitting in it, it becomes a moment, like you said, and it's that half solved. One of the other interesting overlays we use here is you'll notice there's a little key there with clarity, condition, constraint, which is from the lovely Esther Derby, and we add in control. Farnaz, you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think those three layers help us to position ourselves in an organization to know at what level or which field we are playing that leadership role, and then we have these labels to bring different angles to that position. For example, when we talk about clarity, it's about what level of transparency that we have in each level, what sort of information is apparent, what is missing, what are the gaps, and when we do decision making, what sort of metrics we have in place in order to support us to making the right decision for our people, and what is stopping us, what are the constraints that we have in the organization that stop us from moving forward. Sometimes can be converted to an enabler. You can look at them differently and be more creative and leverage those constraints as an enablement to support the organization. And what are the policies and controls that we have in place that provide that guardrail for us to know that, yes, we have autonomy and flexibility, but what is the minimum guardrail we need to have in the organization? So when we steer people, lead people at different level, can help us to get to the expected or shared outcome that we have set in the beginning. I went through them very quickly. There is a lot can be explained for each of them, but I think I look at it as exactly as a map to position myself. If I'm leading an organization, where I am at the moment, is it the right level I want to play based on the activities that I do, based on the behavior I'm showing, which level suits me, and then start reflecting that in order to be an effective and an adaptive leader. Going back to your question, Tony, in order to prioritize and be sure that I am playing at the right level, what do I need to do differently to position myself to a target way, the way that I think I can be a better leader, and what are the things that I need to support me through that journey?
Yeah, I think that's a really good explanation. The one I really get asked about a lot when we do this team is control.
Hmm.
So I like that you position that. But control, we keep saying it. When the system is in a state where there's not clarity and you don't understand those conditions and those constraints, then control is the mechanism that tends to be
Yeah.
applied. So I think understanding the amount of control that's required, and some control is required, right? Your thoughts on that, Dave? Just as I cue in James. Here's one I
Good morning,
prepared earlier.
Dave.
Welcome, James. Lovely to have you on the cast.
Hey, crew. Sorry about that. I'll dial in from my phone since my laptop camera refuses to work.
Fair enough.
Lovely.
Yeah,
Yes.
but control's an interesting one because when something goes wrong, we tend to respond by putting in a control. And control is one of the key things that drags us down into the making domain. So the reason we have senior leaders sitting in project steercos the whole time is because they're exercising control, and that's essentially dragging them down into the detail of the work. When we should really be thinking about, do we need a control here, or do we need to increase the clarity, or do we need to increase the skills in the system, or one of these other levers we can pull, rather than just instituting a control? As Tony said, sometimes control is necessary, but often, rather than control, we could respond with increased clarity or increase something else, rather than a control which drags us down into the making.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing when we see this and when we do this exercise. That's one of the ones that you see people change. And obviously, if you look at this focus mapping tool, one of the things that is on here is the other thing that goes with all of that is actually the time allocation. So we can talk about those things and we can strive them out, but the time allocation between ideal and actual, James, you're very passionate about that. I just throw him in the deep end now. That's what you get for appearing on screen. What's your thoughts on that?
So we do an exercise quite commonly where we ask whoever it is we're working with, how much time should you be allocating to, how important is a particular type of work, whether it's, should you be spending 70% of your time formulating and executing and communicating strategy, or should you be spending more of your time making sure that's communicated between people who've created strategy and people who are doing the work, or how much time should you spend actually producing the value, right? And what we'll almost always find is that people spend a heck of a lot of their time in a domain that's not the one they think they should be spending their time in. There's a lot of leaders who spend a lot of their time in the making domain because they got moved up the chain because they're experts at what they do, and so they keep getting called in to do it. Equally, there's a lot of leaders who should be spending more time down getting their hands dirty to make sure that they actually still understand what's going on down there, and they spend no time down there at all, and they should be spending some. So time allocation is super important. The best leaders that I meet do it really well, but a lot of good leaders that I meet just get kind of trapped into calendar hell. They've got 5 meetings on in every hour bracket of their day, and they're just choosing between meetings rather than owning their agenda and shaping it to how it really should be. Does that make sense? Have I answered that question at all?
We love that. We love that. There's no wrong answers in here because we're the ones answering it, right? The other one I wanted to ask, it looks like it's such a simple tool, but there's a couple of really pointed questions in there too that we use. And one of those is, what are the behaviours? Because I think that's the interesting one when we do this workshop and we pull this out, is when people start addressing and thinking about their behaviours. Dave, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's really 2 types of behaviours you've got to think about. One is like the personal behaviours. The other one is the behaviours of the system. So you get leaders who are stuck in execution because they've stuck themselves in execution. They are, as James said, the technical leader who's always been the technical leader, and there's therefore written all the processes around, outages to include them. So every time there's an outage, the CTO gets called in. And I was actually in an exec session with some, the C-level execs of a large organisation, and the CTO vanished because there was a production outage. And the whole reason he'd end up in that situation was because he'd written the process to force himself to do that. So there's personal behaviours, but then there's also the cultural behaviours of the organisation. So, talking to a different CEO who said, I don't have time to be a CEO. Everyone comes to me for every decision. I'm in 5 meetings every minute of the day. And that was not because of anything he'd done, but because the CEO 2 CEOs ago ruled with a culture of fear and would punish people for making the wrong decision. So all decisions funnel up to the CEO now. But because he didn't, he was in that system, he would then followed what was going on. He didn't do that intentional work to change the system. So the system just kept on running that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And Farnaz, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's the importance of the change of behavior is very, very apparent over here. The part that really attracts me is that change of behavior doesn't happen overnight. And it goes back to how important it is to invest in our leadership, in their learning, in their development. The coaching is a big aspect of that, because when you want to change the dial, you need to go to the root cause of those behavior. What happened in the past that now it's becoming a norm that those leaders behave like that, going back to Dave's example in this case. But in order to go that level of deep and that level of reflection, leaders need help, and coaching is one of the vehicles in order to help them to get there. Going back to the beginning of conversation, I know you probably want to close, Tony, is that leaders don't have much time. They need to prioritize. For some of them, is a new job to do. So what are the resources available to support them in that journey? The good thing is there are so many resources available these days, and also many organizations role modeling those kind of leadership. So providing the focus and time for the leaders to kind of work on themselves, work on their leadership team, can have a huge impact on where their organization is going and supporting their people as well.
Yeah. James, your thoughts?
So when we talk about behaviours, I guess the thought that occurs to me is it helps to get really specific with people. It's it's very easy to say, oh, we should behave like this and we're behaving like that. But if you're going to actually make change, then you need to get really specific and say what behavior, and then ask what again, kind of like the 5 whys. You got to get down, okay, what is the behavior that you want to change? What is the behavior that's acceptable or not acceptable in these situations? And how then are we going to do some experiments and measure whether those experiments help change it or not? That's the insight I would share to further what Dave and Farnaz just said. If you just kind of say, oh yeah, we need more strategic behavior, then you're not going to get anywhere. If you say, I need to spend my time in these meetings with these people providing direction, for instance, then that's reasonably specific behaviors that you can then measure and change.
Yeah, look, I'm going to be a little bit controversial here. We've said a few times that leaders are really, really busy and they don't have a lot of time for this. I'm going to say everybody in the organization is really, really busy. Everybody in the organization is on 5 projects and doing a bunch of different things, and they've got stuff coming at them all, and they're fully booked in their diaries. And the only people in the organization who are allowed to say that they're really busy and can't take anything new on are the senior leaders. Everybody else basically just gets handed a change and goes, do this on top of what you're doing. So, I mean, yes, they're really, really busy, but so is everybody else. And I guess, like I said, it comes down to prioritization. If this is really important, then make time for it.
And if and to further that and be a little bit more snarky, the senior leaders are the people who've got the executive assistants to manage their calendars. Everyone else has to do all those projects and manage their own calendar.
All right. Well, there we go. Okay. So you can see Farnaz and I. For those watching, Farnaz and I are the nice side of the fence, and then
you've got good cop, bad cop, and worse cop here.
I got a great question. A great question that's popped up, and if you saw me tapping, I've just noticed this function where I can tap back to people now. So there you go. The question is, I'm a leader. I've been doing this for a long time. Why should I change?
Oh, that's a really good question. I had a leader in a big organization who basically said, imagine every day I leave the house and I turn right in my car and know I'm going to be at work in 20 minutes. And now you're telling me that there's a new road that's opened up, and if I turn left out of my street, I'm going to be at work in 10 minutes. Now, I might be prepared to give that a go, but if I'm running late, or if it's really important that I'm on time, I'm going to turn right because I know what I'm doing there. So how can we support leaders in helping them turn left? Are things working really perfectly the way you are? If they are, then great, don't change a thing. But if they're not working perfectly, then what can we change? What should we be changing? And how can we support leaders and everyone in the organization to make that new left turn rather than the old familiar right turn, and see where it leads us? And that's, coaching comes in. How can we run experiments? How can we do something that's small and low risk and show that there's a different way of doing things?
I like it. Farnaz?
I add the growth mindset on top of that. There is always room for improvement. There is always a better version that can come in. It depends on how you, as an individual, how much you want to stretch, how ready you are to stretch. Even you want to stretch yourself and think about the next step. So, I think it comes from inside. If you believe you are good enough and you're doing a great job, that says a different message. But if you are looking at getting better, more feedback, looking at your environment, your ways of doing things and leading, yes, I'm sure there is always something that can kind of be a light bulb and help you to go to the next level.
James, you obviously got thoughts on that.
Well, a couple. So if someone's talking to someone like us, it's because there's something they want to improve in their organization. And the successful ones are the ones who say, how can we improve? Not, thank God you're here, please fix them and them. The successful organizations and groups, when it comes to listening to consultants and coaches are the ones who talk about us and realize that if I want a different result, then I need to be part of the change. And I guess the other thing I'd say to answer that question is the best leaders I know in my life always trying to learn and grow and change and always asking for feedback. So I guess that's it. That's my response. You don't have to, like you say, if everything's all right and you got other things on your mind, you don't have to change. That's
and you don't want to get any. You don't want to get any better. Right throughout the Usain Bolt, fastest man who ever lived. Freak on legs.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole time he was world champion and the fastest man alive, had a running coach, because he knew that he wasn't running against anybody else. He could already beat everybody else. He wanted to beat himself. And with that, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you guys because I have to go and run a workshop. So
it's wonderful, Dave. Thanks for spending the time with us today.
Not a problem.
Cheers,
See ya.
Cheers. So I've got one final sort of question because we are running close to the end of our time. So interestingly enough, and it was piqued by I was watching TV last night on one of the news programs, and they had a leader, and he was talking about the remote return to work. We're not going to talk about that, but one of the interesting things as a leader that he was talking about was saying, I see all of this stuff about leaders need to follow the data.
Mm-hmm.
But the data always misses the humans in this. And so my answer to that is, I think you're asking the wrong questions, my friend, because if the data you're reading is explicitly only about the operational, then you're not asking the right questions around the humanity in your organisation. But I want to throw that to yourselves. Farnaz, what's your thoughts on that?
Always, rather than saying data-driven decision, I said data-enabled decision. So we still need humans and people's experience and knowledge to help us through the journey. Data provides one perspective and enable us to see a bigger picture. But still, I think that human factor is really important. I know these days everyone talk about AIs and the future of we as human, we play a less important role. But I believe that the human factor is very strong, especially in the decision making. There are so many intangible things that helps us in our decision making that you cannot reflect it necessarily on data, but it helps you to broaden your perspective, looking at different areas and support you in your decision making.
Yeah, I like that. I'll just jump in there, James. I'll give you a moment, but I just wrote with a friend of mine. Just wrote a little book on something around this stuff called governance agility, and one of the focus points or the lenses that we use is called data-driven reasoning, and we wrote it that way particularly because some of the things you just said there, Farnaz, is that it's about reasoning. Just because you get this plethora of data, you need to reason your way through how you're going to use that and how that reflects your organisation. You don't just take that as a given and make a decision straight off of it. You still have to actually work through that data and understand it. James, you had some thoughts. You were about to say something before I jumped in and did a shameless plug. Oh, and on that is frozen. Well, there we go. We'll leave him there for a moment. Melody's given us a really good little comment there. What's your thoughts on that, Farnaz?
Let me read that.
Yeah, I can read it out for you if you like. Something I say a lot is that even though leaders have a rubber stamp to transformational change, it doesn't mean they understand or are ready for the change themselves or love the slant to the leadership coaching. So what's your thoughts on that one?
I think I partially agree with that. That preparation for leaders is really important. And you touched on that, Tony, is that when someone becomes a leader, they usually come from the operational perspective. Someone has been really good in doing their job and then suddenly will be promoted to act as a leader. So there are different elements needs to be considered in that preparation. Not the fact that that person has been there in organization many years or knows many different people necessarily is the right criteria for becoming a leader. And I believe in leadership at different levels. So you don't need to necessarily be on top of the hierarchy to play that leadership role. Of course, there are so many criteria in order to step in that. I think the most important one, what you need, the self-awareness is very important. You need to know yourself as an individual well enough to take into a step of leading others. So definitely my advice or my 50 cents is to everyone wants to look at themselves as a leader is that look at the intrinsic motivation. Why do you want to be a leader, and how ready you are to take the responsibility for leading others, even just one person. That's a big responsibility.
Thanks, Farnaz. James, you were about to jump in. Was it my shameless plug that ended you?
Yeah, I was just, oh my God. And Phil's got an extra one in the chat there. So I am very much looking forward to reading your book, by the way, Governing Agility. It's I'm super excited about that, and I'll throw in an extra little plug for everyone who's listening. governingagility.com.au. You should be able to order a book there. Go do it.
Thank you very much.
But I think there's coming back to just before my internet dropped out because I'm in New Zealand and that's how it works. The data-driven decisions conversation. I think there's a reasonable insight in saying, well, the data misses the people. You've got to be people-driven, story-driven. You've got to be all those things. Are you there? Damn it. Have I dropped out again?
No, you're back. There you go.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'll try one more time and I'll try to talk faster or less. I think all of those things are important. Is the stuff McMenamin has done with sense making is really cool because it tries to capture the people in really specific data in really interesting ways. So I recommend people look into that. Yeah. But also, you need the data to understand what's happening and get the big picture of the organization, but you also need to have the conversations, and you need to do both. Some people are driven by data and don't understand that it's missing certain aspects that you need. Other people have two conversations and decide that's what's happening and not look at the data at all. You need to do both. You need to check the one against the other. There's no, as much as governing agility folks out there might say, here's the perfect way to capture data. You can't. There's no perfect way to capture data. So it's just get the data you can and be aware of the big picture and be aware of the little picture. It's kind of what Tolstoy does in War and Peace. You look at the whole big picture and then dive down to have a look at all the details of one particular person's life or what they do and then dive back out again. You've got to be able to do both to be a good leader.
Yeah, and I think being intentional about that the leadership in terms of how the data that you do capture, if you're looking to create flow within your organisation, then you want to think and be very intentional about it. But that doesn't mean that you've got all the right metrics. You have to keep continually improving, to your point, James. I think that's a great point. And I think the other one I just wanted to pick up on was he said McMenamin, and we're big fans of McMenamin, both Phil and I in the book, but Raf as well, and I know this group, because it just does give you that extra lens to understand where you're sitting at that moment in time in the construct. Is it a complex or is it complicated? Because there are different modes of leadership that you need, and understanding where you need in that, but it's also about where your organisation sits in that as well. So I think that's a good one. Farnaz, thoughts?
The thing that I was just imagining in my head when you showed our focus mapping for the 3 layers of leadership, I was thinking about how McMenamin can be helpful in conjunction with that view as well. Because we talk about positioning yourself as a leader where you are. Also, you can use McMenamin to position your environment in what domain you are playing, and then based on that, start deciding what behavior you need to show in order to make that change happen. Are you in a complicated domain or you're in a complex domain? Because your behavior and the motivation for change can be completely different.
Yeah, I agree. And just so you know, that's my co-author sticking his oar in there, so so add to the conversation. But I think that's a really good point, Phil. It's a good conversation to drive improvement. That's a key factor in what you're saying there. What's your thought on that, team?
Well, if I just come back to the McMenamin thing for a moment, just to be clear, I was talking more about the sense maker framework rather than the complexity framework. It's so if people haven't heard of it, it's a really cool way of, like, you ask people to tell stories, and then you ask them to rate their stories against particular data points, and then you say, right, we've got a whole lot of stories. When people think of this organization, the story they would tell to their friend if they were thinking about coming to work here is this, or we've used it in earthquake recovery in Papua New Guinea, and it was, what's the story you would tell about the time of recovery from the earthquake? And they would just tell a story, and then you would ask them to rate that story against different descriptors. And then you say, right, we've got lots of descriptors that say it was fast, but we haven't got many that say it gave me what I needed. So you can then say, well, how do we move to get more stories that would be described like this? So it's a really good way of using data, but it's absolutely about capturing the person. So that's what I was thinking, rather than the McMenamin framework itself. So I just wanted to
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I think both of them have got great premise when you're talking about this particular subject. The Phil's point about, if there's disagreement on the data, that's okay. There's really good conversation to drive improvement. What's your thoughts?
100%. 100%. You can't wait you're never going to have perfection. So you've always got to be iterating and evolving, and investigating and checking that, how come the data says this, but someone disagrees with it, or we interpret it in different ways. How do we actually, walk around the floor of our organization and learn more about it, and have the right conversations, and not just with other people in the strategic domain, but also with the people on the ground doing the work.
Yeah. Thoughts, Farnaz?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of value on data, but yes, it's finding the right data point that answers all the questions, always a challenge. So using it as just start looking at the problem, looking at the underlying layers, the root causes, I think that's really helpful. It doesn't necessarily have answers to all the problems, but yeah, I think the fact that even looking at, do we have the right data around this problem we are trying to solve, starts many good conversations. And kind of, is it people's senses or people's feeling, or are we looking at the facts and the main reasons that behind our problem? Because usually, sometimes you see in the organization, people use their own feelings and their own internal motivations to refer to something that, oh, we see a problem here. But when you bring the data and facts to the picture on the table, it can shift the way you are looking at the problems and where exactly you need to put your focus.
Look, Tim, we as I always say in this cast, it's a very short cast, and we could go on for a lot longer. We are at the end of our time, but it's been a great segue, I think, this last part of the conversation into the next time we get together. We will look into data as well, because that's one of the pillars that we look at. So we'll have a look at that as well. The next time we get together, we'll take this to a further conversation around that. I would just say my last comment on it before we shut it down is really just remember, as a leader, don't create a cottage industry around data. You end up with 3,000 people trying to slice and dice into that comment before, then you're waiting for that perfect analysis. That's not going to get you where you need to go. If you think you're just creating a whole complexity around your organization. And as I said, then you pay a complexity tax in time and cost and people. It's been fantastic having you on at Talking Remote today, guys. Those watching, don't forget, like, subscribe, so keep this thing rolling. And of course, join remoteaf.co, click the community button. Fantastic to have you. Lots of like-minded people talking about this stuff. Team Craft, our newsletter, join that. You'll find the details in the show notes below. Farnaz, James, and Dave. And of course, even our pseudo Phil, who popped in for a little bit. Thank you for being here today at Talking Remote.
Thank you.
Cheers, Tony.